Okay, so welcome to part 2 of my CIS 212 Chapter 3 lecture. Now we're going to talk about variables, scope, and that sort of thing. If you put the declaration outside of your class, that's called public scope or class level scope. And what that means is, if you look on page 127, you'll see an example of this. What that means is every event, method, whatever you have inside of that form class, form main there, can see private dec total. See that declaration right? That's class level variable. That's not always a good thing. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Well, I have here basically the same form I had on part 1. I just changed the name of this button and I'm going to do something different with the code. What I want to do is every time the user clicks on this button, I want to count it and display how many times they've clicked it. All right. Well, that's pretty easy to do because I just put a counter in there called int clicks. It's an integer because it's just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And I'm going to add 1 to it every time. Now, this is something that they'll introduce to you if they haven't already done it. It's a shortcut to code. This evaluates out the same as int clicks equals int clicks plus 1. It could be any number over here. You have minus equals, divide equals, multiplication equals, and so forth, modulus equals. So it's just a shortcut. So when you see this, think this. All right, so I'm just adding 1 to it every time. So every time this event fires, the user has clicked, and I want to add 1 to it. Now, how am I going to display that? Well, I'm going to use a message box method, which you may have seen already, hopefully, and you have to use the .show method. Oops, I spelled it. Show, and the show in this instance it has a lot of different. It has 21 implementations. I'm just going to put this count out there. I'll put a string in here and I'll concatenate it with another. So you know what concatenation is? It's a joining of 2 strings from your other class, your logic class. In this particular language, use an ampersand, and it joins whatever's on the left with whatever's on the right. If they're not strings, it makes strings out of them, and then joins them together. Now, this is one of the legacy issues that I talk about throughout this course. The ampersand implicitly converts. There's nothing you can do about that. So you just have to you can explicitly convert it, which I'm going to do, but you can't change the nature of that ampersand. It will do that. So you need to, again, make sure you explicitly convert everything, okay? So I'm going to put number of clicks, C-L-I-C-K-S, equals ampersand. Now, if I just put int clicks in here, it'll probably work. It shouldn't, but that's the nature of the legacy of ampersand. I want to go ahead and I don't want to rely on that. I'm going to use convert .toString, and I'll turn that integer into a string so that it will display properly. You always have to explicitly convert, regardless of what you think or what they tell you will happen. Okay, so every time I come in here, what's going to happen? Well, maybe it will increase by 1. Let's see. Let's run it. Say F5. Come on. Bill started. My goodness. It takes so long. And I don't understand why there's just nothing to this project. Probably because this computer is just not very robust. It has 4 gigs of RAM, and that's all. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Hopefully. I don't like. Let's see. It looks like I have an error somewhere. Nope. Okay. So just ignore this. This is not what's going to happen. I want to count clicks. Number of clicks equals 1. Okay, that's right. I clicked it once. Number of clicks. Whoop. Something's going on. What is it? All right. Let's look back at this. Since this is local scope, after this thing finishes, when it comes back again, everything's wiped out. So it just reinstantiates or reinitializes this to 1. So there's no way for it to maintain its value this way because that's local scope. All right. It re-declares it, reinitializes it to 0. It doesn't matter whether I put the 0 in there or not. It's always going to be 1. Okay, so this isn't going to work. However, according to public class main, I can form main. I can make this a class level variable, right? And I can just take the declaration out of here and put it up here. Now we have class level scope, which means any click event in here can see it, all right? Because it's no longer being deleted and rebuilt every time. So if I have a bunch of different click events that need to see that, it can see it and increment it, all right? So let's run it and see if this works, and it should. So count clicks, it does. That's because it's not being reset every time. It's just being incremented every time. All right, so I don't have an exit button on there. Probably should have one, but I'm in a hurry. So, however, this is not the best way to do this. This kind of violates the object-oriented design issue. So, you shouldn't be able to, unless you're using strict class setters and getters and you're instantiating objects of a class and doing some things we'll look at later. This is just not good practice at all. So I'm going to comment that out. So what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? Well, if you'll flip over to page 128 and 129, you will see something called a static keyword, static variables. This forces it to maintain its scope in here, or excuse me, its content, which is not. Again, this is better than what we did before, but not great. So, static dim, use the static keyword, and let's see if this works. So what it does, if you look on page 129, you'll see static dec total is decimal, and so anyway, it's going to maintain its value because static is telling the compiler to maintain the value. All right. So let's see. Let's press F5 see if that works. And again, it is working. Okay. And even though it is local scope, local or block scope or function level scope or subroutine level scope, it's still maintaining its value because of that static command, static keyword. Okay, we know about constants, right? You should know about constants. I'll let you read that. I'm not going to go over everything in here. If you flip over, because you should know it, and if you've read the chapter and worked through the examples in the chapter, you'll know this. 133, page 133, we've already done this in the settings for the compiler. So if you look at 135, figure 3-25, that won't be in your code, all right? Because we've done it in a global setting for the compiler. We won't have to do that every time. I'm telling you, I've seen this so many times. If you type that into every project, you're going to forget to do it. And then things are going to blow up. When I see it's not there and then I tell you need it, well, then your code might be broken. All right, so much for that. Let's see what else we have here. Like I say, a lot of this stuff you already know. Formatting a string. Let's format a string. Okay, let's go back here. I'm going to put another label on this form for output. Okay, just copy this, stick it down here, paste it twice. This is going to be the label. All right. That looks funny. Oh well. Okay, so this is label 2. I'm going to put it label output, or label output. All right. And then the text would be formatted. Probably going to have to make this bigger. Yep. change this to raw number or unformatted number. Okay. Now these need to be bigger, substantially so. Move this over a little bit. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to make this say, so let me go ahead and take this, before I do that, change this to label format. And I'm going to go down here and make the border style 3D fixed. So we'll kind of see what it is. The user kind of expects that. And I'm going to take the text out of there because we're going to be putting a formatted number in there. Okay. So we'll be typing the formatted number in, or the unformatted number in, and then we'll be converting it to a formatted number like $signs, 2 decimal places. And you can look on page 152 and they show you these codes. So you can use the toString method of a variable, this is a numeric variable, because that's what you're doing. That's one of the methods, intrinsic methods of the numeric variable object. And you're passing into the toString, quote, C2. That tells it use currency. See up here in the chart, 3-35, format specifier C for currency, and 2 means display it to 2 decimal places and round it. So we're going to do that quickly here. All right, let me rename or change this to format. F ampersand for your alt key combination. Always put something in there. As long as it's not already defined by Windows, you can use it once only per form. All right, so I'm going to get the text. Let's see. I need a, what do I want to do? Double. This is VB. DBL number equals 0.0. And there are different ways. Oops, forgot my as. Keep forgetting. As double. There we go. All right. So there's my number, numeric variable of type double. And into that, or from that, I want to put it in my text box, formatted as $. All right. Oops. Text. If you don't have a space in there, IntelliSense thinks it's all one word, and we'll pop it up. Number 1 dot text. And I want to stick, whoops. I mean, I could have just gone easier way here, but I want to use these methods for your benefit. Convert dot to double. Right there. So we're going to grab that string out of the text property. We're going to change it or convert it into a double and stick it into our double variable, which is a perfectly fine thing to do because it's a double into a double. And here again, I've forgotten that I'm using VB. There's no line character terminator. All right, now I want to format this and pass it back as a string into our label. All right, that's our output list. So label format is the name of it, dot text. What is the default type for a text property? String. All right. Assignment. And I'm going to have to use the toString method of the double object. toString. And what am I going to pass into it? Quote, C2, close quote. And that should, what it's going to do is we've converted this to a number, stuck it into our double number. I'm going to take that number, convert it back into a string, and format it as currency, and then display it into my label format.text. We hope. Let's run it. No errors, so I don't have any tabs. That unformatted number, I'm going to put 75.2659. All right, then when I click this, it should put a $sign on there and round that to 75.27. And it did, 75.27. And there's your $sign. So that's how you format different types for output. I'm not going to go over the input box because that's rare. That's never used. You need to know how it works. This is a very simple way to get input. Most of the time you'll have your own input forms for that. You need to know how to do it and how to call it. It's very simple, but it's not very functional, so I'll let you read that. Let's see, default button. Oh, control chars. I love control chars. So what if I wanted to come in here and add something to this? A new line, let's say. Let me see if this will work in a label. Let me do this. I'll make this a little bigger. Well, how do you want to do a new line? You can use an escape character, for a \n, but luckily, and this is really great, I wish C# had this, VB has a class called control chars or control characters. And there's a whole list of things that you can get from this, like tabs, new lines, there's all sorts of things. Let's try it. I want to add a new line to this with an ampersand. It returns as control characters are strings basically. So control chars dot. Look at that. There's a carriage return line feed, new line. I'm going to use this, I think. What does this do? What's the difference? Should be the same thing. Okay. There's quotes, and you use those when you're put quotes inside of quotes. And then I'm going to put another string over here, concatenate all this together. So what it's going to do when you display this, hopefully, I may have to put a list box in there to do this, but a label might work. Double number 2 string, you're going to put that in there. You're going to have a new line, and then we're going to put another line of text on the second line in that label, we hope. I am rich. I would say wealthy, but that's too highfalutin. Okay. Let's see what we get. Okay. 75, 6, 8, 9. How about that? It worked. Yeah, so just put a new line in there. So I could have multiple lines inside of a label or a list box or whatever. So that's how control chars works. I think we're getting near the end of this. There's one other thing I want to show you, and that is the handling clause for a click event. All right. Let me close this. Go back here. And we don't need this anymore. Delete. Oh, I must have the controls locked or what? Oh, there we go. Okay. Change this back to text box 1. That's good enough for this. That's just the output now. That's not the name of it. We wouldn't use it. We'll leave the name like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these. Move them up here like so. Now, let's say that you have text box 2, that you have an event for multiple objects that does the same exact thing. Well, if I have an event that does the same exact thing without using the handles, I'll have to have separate events for each one of these, even though they're duplicate code. Like text changed event. That's what we're going to do in this text box. I'd have to have a text changed event for this text box, which is text number 1. Let me go back and change these names. Text number 2. And this would be text number 3. All right. So I would have to have a text change event, which is probably the default for a text box. Let's see if it is. Yeah. I'd have to have one for each one of these. I'd have to have text number 1, text change, and I'd have to have all my code in there, right? And then I'd have to have text number 2, text change, and I'd have to have the same code in there. Okay, so that's not really what we want to do. Get rid of It's just not efficient. So what you can do is you can use the handles here and set up a comma delimited list and tell this same event to handle, to trap that text change event for all the others. So when the other text boxes fire a text changed event, which means text is changed, it's going to use text number one's text changed event to handle that. So you just have one text change event which handles multiple objects. Okay, so I can do text number 2 dot text changed. Now I don't have these events yet, so that, well, let's see if it'll work. And then text number 3 dot text changed. Now here's where you can the line continuation character in VB comes in handy. In most languages you just hit enter, and until you see the ending semicolon which terminates the line. In some of the other languages it thinks of it as one line. Visual Basic does not use a line termination character. So in order to spread this out over multiple lines, like if I had a bunch of these, I'd have to scroll for miles. Not really, but for a long way. It just wouldn't be very readable. Even this isn't readable. So in order to continue the line on another line in your code editor, you have to press underscore and hit enter. And that pushes it over to another line. That's called the line continuation character. All right, so now I have to have some way to process something in here. Okay, and there's a way to determine using the E and the sender which one of these text boxes has fired this event. So if you wanted to do that, you could, and we'll get into that later. That's a little bit beyond our scope of what we're trying to do. But I will say, I will put a message box in here, and you'll see that when text change happens in any of these three, this is going to fire right here. And we can put a breakpoint too if you want to. If I have time, I will. Otherwise, you can do it. Play with it. Show, and I'm going to put text has changed. So, alrighty. Let's see if we can get this running here. Hope I got the names right. Anytime I put something in or take something out, this text has changed. So let me click down here on this one. See, that same event is handling all three of these text boxes. So even if I come in here and do this and backspace, it's still a text changed event. So that's pretty cool. You can do that in the other languages too, but this really makes it a lot easier right here. Okay, so that associates a procedure with a different object. This works really well if you're using the same code everywhere. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about. That's it. That's the end of my lecture for this chapter. Enjoy. See you at chapter 4.